Okay. Yeah, swing on around.
I think one of these, the battery's dying.
Okay.
Do we know, or is the red one?
Uh,
Check.
Nobody should be using those
Nobody's using it.
at this session, so it should be good. So if one goes out, it's fine. Okay, that's okay.
So all the slides are already,
All the slides are already up.
like 1 minute.
Yeah.
And then so every time I have to go now. Annette.
It should be. So as soon as the second one is right here. And then third one is here. Sure. So so essentially, when they get to the end of their slideshow, all you have to do is hit end slideshow. They have closing off. That's going to take it all the way out. And you just click the next one, and then click over here to start. So nope. You can ignore the no problem.
Yeah, but then I did that. Things that have to come back and share again.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure this not a problem.
Next later.
Nice to meet you.
Yes. I'm not getting ready. Yeah, so I think it's not. I'm sorry. Yeah, you have that.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you. Do you want me on the side or do you want this way? Okay. Oh.
I guess so. Yeah, I wonder
Oh, thank you. Good. Thank you. Will you take more from? I've been looking at you for like moral support.
I have to sneak out, but I need to sit in a good. Maybe I'll sit.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and then like anyway, to buy I was just wondering who said I tried to get around. He's so great. Well, tell her that Ariel is speaking of her. One of our Arthur with an email, but I'm very happy for her. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is very indicators yeah, because right now he's signing this out. It's a good reminder. Yeah, it's very precise. Yes. Yes. Are you gonna take this? Have you taken this?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our verbal presentation session. My name is Marilina Excellent. I am a faculty at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, over the School of Global Public Health. I am delighted and honored to serve as the moderator for this session. And we are very welcome. I'm very excited to welcome 4 presenters in this session. The focus of this session will be about water scarcity and security. With no further ado, please help me welcome our first speaker, who will discuss the assessment of sanitation infrastructure resilience to extreme rainfall and flooding. Please welcome Sarah. And Sarah is with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Over to you.
Hello. So my name is Sarah. I am a PhD student here at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm also a researcher with the Water Institute, and I am delighted to talk about my presentation today. I will be discussing the resilience of sanitation infrastructure to extreme rainfall and flooding events. So just to give you some little background to situate you. So there's evidence that pressures from climate change are becoming more heightened. And as a result of that, we are seeing more frequent, more intense extreme weather events, and particularly extreme rainfall and flooding. On the other hand, we know that sanitation systems that are designed to hygienically separate excreta, such as pit latrines, septic systems, as well as toilets connected to sewers, those can truly fail in the event of extreme rainfall and flooding. When they fail, though, what happens is that there is increased release of human waste into the environment. So with all that we know, we are really not certain of how effectively these sanitation systems can safely contain human waste, particularly in light of climate change. So based on all of these insights, we still really have a limited understanding of the level of resilience of different sanitation systems. Now, my work is going to focus on informal settlements, particularly Kibera in Nairobi, Kenya, where I'm from. And I hope that this work can truly help us understand individual systems, their characteristics, what drives their levels of resilience in a bid to be able to plan for more climate resilient infrastructure. So in terms of my objectives for this piece of work, I examined the different structural characteristics of different sanitation systems in Kibera, Kenya, their surrounding catchment environment, different routine operations, management practices. On objective 2, I measured and ranked the different sanitation infrastructure to see how they perform when subjected towards extreme rainfall and flooding. And third, I explored different existing adaptation strategies that can be used to mitigate these impacts. So to help with the framing before we dive deeper, particularly for this piece of work, I'm considering resilience as the capacity of a sanitation system to return to its normal operation, normal functionality after being subjected to extreme rainfall and flooding events. I'm also thinking about extreme rainfall as anomalies of rainfall, particularly exceeding the 90th percentile of daily estimates, or think about it as exceeding 1.5 standard deviations above the monthly estimates of rain. For my methods, I conducted a cross-sectional study in Kibera informal settlement. A map of Kibera is right there. It's at the heart of Nairobi in Kenya. And I sampled over 200 sanitation systems of different types. And I selected that sample purposively to really represent all the different types of sanitation technologies in that study area, as well as different toilets, those located on higher grounds, those on lower grounds, those located far from water bodies and closer to water bodies. This is a zoomed in map of Kibera, and the red dots do represent the different sanitation systems that I sampled. And a lot of these were particularly located within 30-meter radius of a water body. So this is showing a delineated watershed of that study area in Kibera. Data collection was conducted through transect walks. We did some structured observations, conducted a survey, and also inspected the different sanitation systems. The survey was administered to users of the toilets, as well as operators of these sanitation systems, particularly because many of them are shared and are run by an operator who charges per fee per use. We used trained field assistants and also community health volunteers within this setting to collect this data. And I will not dive deeply into an index that I used to rank the different systems. That's I can share details for that work. It's already been published. But after collecting the data for the sake of analysis, we used an existing system, an existing index, which consists of 21 questions that are related to different structural, physical design, construction, siting of the toilets, how they are managed, as well as different environmental factors. With that data, we used confirmatory factor analysis to determine the importance, the relative importance of the different variables. So to give you a glimpse into the different systems that I looked at within this study area, you can see on the extreme, well, right over there, that was a pit latrine that essentially is a hanging toilet, not really a pit latrine, but it's hanging over a cliff that drains onto a stream. So a couple of really mixed systems, some of them really rudimentary, really basic, makeshift, and also more advanced, really more robust systems as well. I would like to draw attention as well to the structure over there, particularly to how raised the doorsteps are, because I will refer to that later in my presentation. Still more pictures of the different systems that I sampled. As I said, like a really diverse range of systems, really well constructed. Others are just makeshift and temporary. So after observing these systems, just to segue into the findings, I used the index that I talked about to create a score for each of those different systems. What I'd really like you to take away from this table is that different sanitation systems, different technologies ranked differently in terms of resilience to extreme rainfall. Sewer toilets ranked highest, sewer septic systems ranked really high, but unimproved latrines ranked low. Now, these results are really specific to this particular study community, and the results could look way different in another area. We plotted out the different resilience scores to the map in Kibera. So what you're seeing in green are areas of just continuous areas of high resilience, and red continuous areas of low resilience. And the blue over there is a man-made dam that serves this catchment. And you can see as you go more downstream, lower in elevation, the systems become less resilient. We did some sensitivity analysis to determine how the different sanitation resilience scores will differ. So toilets that are improved turned out to have higher resilience. Toilets that were located in lower lying areas had lower resilience. Sanitation systems that had protective measures. So think about things like elevated latrines like I'd showed before. Those turned out to have higher resilience. And locating a sanitation system in an area with a high water table turned out to have low resilience. I'll talk about those a little bit. So in terms of the factors that drive the resilience of different sanitation infrastructure, our findings were categorized into three. So we had factors that are particularly related to the structural design of the system and its functionality, but as well as where it's located, physically speaking. So within those, we found that systems that are located in low-lying areas, systems that were located within a floodplain, those that turned out to be cracked visibly, those that appear to have really poor structural integrity, evidence of overflows, directly discharging into open drains. I talked about a hanging toilet. Systems that presented blocked pipes, damaged pipes, those are the ones that scored the least in terms of resilience. Moving on to the second factor, the findings revealed that the technology in itself is not the only factor that drives resilience. So having more management practices around how frequently you empty the toilet, whether you keep it clean, those were also drivers of resilience. And third, more environmental factors related to how high the water table is, or will really determine more groundwater seeping into those systems and therefore influence resilience. We found a couple of adaptation strategies, so there's hope. I've listed on the slide a few strategies that were prevalent in that area, but I would like to highlight that just elevating pit latrines really went a long way towards making sure that resilience was high, particularly for just pit latrines. There was also more non-structural adaptations, things like early warning systems, the community just self-organizing into ways of managing their toilets, cleaning up, stormwater drains were also equally helpful. However, with adaptation measures, it is really easy to get a false sense of security if you do not consistently just routinely maintain them and keep them up to speed. The study had some limitations. These findings are applicable, obviously, to the study setting in Kibera, Nairobi, but the map here on this slide has some gray dots, which represent different slum communities, informal settlement communities all over the world. So this work will really be applicable there in terms of designing more resilient sanitation systems. It was a cross-sectional study, so we just had really one snapshot at a point in time. It would have been great to have different sets of data points to compare how that changes with time. But for the future, we are really hoping to start thinking more around the different indicators that we measured, try to find ways to refine those so that this work will be applicable to other contexts as well. Speaking broadly about implications, how this work could be leveraged by communities, by government officials, we are hoping that this work can inform prioritizing more superior options of sanitation technologies. And out of this work for this particular study area, as I'd said before, just having sewer systems and toilets connected to septic tanks turned out to be the most superior option. Starting to think about how communities can increasingly empty their pit latrines, as I'd said before, management, how the way you manage your toilets, besides how you construct it, also goes a long way in increasing resilience. I will stop at this point and take questions.
3 minutes for questions, so the floor is open.
Yeah, we have one over there.
That will be one.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think you had a great presentation and a lot to cover in such a short amount of time. I know you touched on the implications a little bit. I was hoping you could give some more details about policy implications of this work.
Thank you, that's helpful. I'm gonna repeat it. So the question is to discuss a little bit more about the policy implications of this work. So I'll go back to my slide. In terms of policy implications, I'm thinking that I'd mentioned issues of siting. So just starting to think around standards and guidelines around where to site your toilet, a safe distance away from a water body, as well as guidelines around just design of the toilet itself. What should the physical design look like? So, and that will translate into just training local plumbers and construction and repairmen really to be able to respond to more resilient systems. Thank you, Laura.
really interesting. I was wondering, so we know that resilience is very shock and stress dependent. So I was just wondering, like, were you able to validate the effects looking at, if there was a flood happening? Because you also mentioned like resilience, you're looking at resilience as returning, which means sort of a sanitation system kind of like returning to, its original function. So I was wondering, if you were validating the systems, I guess, like return to original function if there was a flood happening.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. That is what our next step would be. So the limitation that I had for this work is that we did not collect any outcome data. So all we are doing is predicting how resilient those systems would be, but we really do not know. We did not measure actual resilience. So the next step to answer that would be to look more into environmental data, just rainfall estimates, to be able to tell what the shocks would look like, how long, how intense, and be able to see if this index can respond to that. Thank you.
Again, thank you.
Our next speaker will discuss prior knowledge of supply interruptions mitigates the emotional and behavioral impacts of water supply intermittency with Cassandra. And Cassandra is with the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. With no further ado, please help us welcome. Over to you.
Hello, thank you. We're going to switch from sanitation to drinking water, as we do. So as mentioned, my name is Cassandra Workman. I'm faculty in the Department of Anthropology just up the road. I do have a caveat with this presentation. I'm one of the co-authors, but I did not do the models. So if I misspeak, I'm sorry. And I hope I correctly represent what was done. So we convened a meeting in January to discuss intermittency. We brought together engineers and social scientists, and we wanted to think through, what does it mean to be intermittent? What does it mean when you cannot depend on continuous water? And some of us, myself, for example, really come at this research looking at mental health outcomes. Some of the engineers were more concerned with system implications. We had economists also present, but we really were, the key driving question was, what does intermittency or interruptions in your service, how does that contribute to household water insecurity? And so, when we were talking, we also really tried to get into, well, when we talk about intermittency, what do we mean? Do we mean that it occasionally cuts out, it's all the time? What if you know about your cut going to happen? What if you're on rationed water? How is this going to affect your psycho-emotional health, but also your household water insecurity? And we wanted to know, well, not only how you can conceive of cuts, but can we quantify them and look at, the outcomes? So this is actually derived from a larger study called the Household Water Insecurity Experiences Study. It was done in 2017 and 2018, and it involved collecting data from over 8,000 households in 29 sites in 24 countries. And it was a part of a study that was done to validate an experiential household water insecurity scale. And so in 2017 and 2018, we actually enumerated 2 waves of data collection where we were trying to refine the scale. So there's implications of that when it comes to our methods. But when we looked at intermittency, we were able to conduct this particular study on 10 sites in 9 countries. And this has to do with how the questions were asked in the 2 different waves of the data collection for the parent study. So our conceptual model was this, that you have to look at the social, political, infrastructural kind of larger context in which water cuts occur. And then we were going to explore not only intermittency, but also the predictability of it. And so I'm really going to spend the rest of the talk working you through this. So again, we were trying to identify the larger drivers. Obviously, there's infrastructural drivers. That particular picture shows, an actual break in the pipe. There's hydrological, seasonal, and social and political, which social scientists like myself are particularly concerned with. And we also see the effects. So you have obviously health impact studies have demonstrated that when water is not continuous, it can actually decrease the quality of your drinking water. There's time costs. If your tap isn't working, how are you going to secure your water? Now do you have to walk more kilometers to get it? There's infrastructural costs in terms of maintenance. The engineers always talk about system maintenance and kind of the perturbations to the system and what that means for functionality. And as I mentioned, my particular interest in, along with some of my colleagues, is emotional distress. And so water insecurity as a predictor of emotional health outcomes is fairly well established in the literature. But we also wanted to add to that, not just the effects psychologically, what happens when you are exposed to water cuts, what do you have to do? And so what we determined was that there's also stressful behaviors. And so these behaviors include things like having to change your plans. And I'll get into all of that in a slide or two. So what we did was we looked at the various questions that we had, and we wanted to determine whether or not we could come up with one composite score that would affect the different sub-variables that we had for emotional distress. And so the lead analyst did principal component analyses on the various questions and did find that you can collapse several of these individual items into one score. So what we came up with was an emotional distress score. So these are the individual items that contributed to this. So worry about having sufficient water, worry about your personal safety while obtaining water, feeling shame about not having enough, and feeling anger about not having enough water. So similarly, we then came up with a stressful behavior score using these individual items, which was changing plans due to not having water, missing social or cultural events, borrowing water, and drinking water that you perceived to be unsafe, so that you had to resort to drinking this water. So we also conducted structural equation models looking at these scores, but trying to see what variables were associated with them. So we were most interested in, frequency of water interruptions. These were actually frequency data. The scores were in the last month. How often have you experienced each item, each facet of water insecurity? We were also really concerned with, was this expected? Because we thought that this was going to be really important in this association. And obviously we controlled for certain variables that we thought would impact the association between these variables. This is rather small, but I just wanted to point out that in terms of the correlations with the outcome variables, you do see interruptions, predictability, household size correlated significantly, water storage, so whether or not you stored water in your home, social status and water status were actually, they're modified MacArthur scales. And so we were looking at perceived rank, social rank within your community, but also perceived water status. So how do you see your household's water status compared to your community, compared to your neighbors? And we found that those were both associated with the outcome variables as well. And seasonality, so dry season was. So in terms of the actual models, though, this first model we ran had over 2,000 cases, almost 3,000. And this was just looking at the outcomes and interruptions, but not yet predictability. And so these are actually two different models. There's 4 all told. So what you'll see here is, again, interruptions, household size, water storage, and water status all correlate significantly with both emotional distress as well as stressful behaviors. And then when we added in the predictability, it did change the relationship slightly, but you still see though that interruptions and predictability were both positively and significantly associated with the outcome. But water storage actually had an inverse relationship. So if you stored water, you were less likely to exhibit the stressful emotions or the stressful behaviors. Water status was correlated. So people with who perceived higher water status were also less likely to report these negative outcomes. And then you see urbanicity actually had a small significant association, as did dry season. And urbanicity was only in terms of emotional distress and not the stressful behaviors. And also we did additional robustness checks, which I won't get into, but just trust that they were done. And I could provide you with more information about how we treated the different individual variables in the models. They were treated ordinally and continuously for the robustness. But most importantly, let's get to the results. And so obviously water supply interruptions are stressful. I think we've indicated that not only do they cause psycho-emotional distress, so feelings, they also trigger stressful behaviors. And so to go back to the conceptual model, we actually think of this like a feedback loop, right? And so you're stressed because of the water interruptions. You engage in stressful behaviors, which then reinforce your stress. So, but we also found though that predictability reduces emotional distress by 25%, and particularly stressful behaviors by 50%. And so obviously having storage is going to mitigate some of these effects. So in terms of limitations, unfortunately, when we had to look to tabulate the different countries, we were concerned with missingness. We had to be able to calculate these principal component analyses. So it ended up kicking out some of the countries. So we have no sites in Europe or Africa. I think this is important, is that we don't have any longitudinal understanding of this. So how is predictability going to actually affect this relationship over time? So if your prediction, your water is cut one day, getting advance notice might be incredibly helpful. If your water is cut every third day for 6 years, then the predictability might attenuate over time. We also wanted to look at physical health impacts as it relates to predictability in the future. And we also think that there are probably intra-household and gendered impacts here, so that the effects of interruptions or predictability are not the same within the household or across households. So in conclusion, we really are thinking of predictability as a buffer because it's able to reduce the negative impact of non-continuous water supply. In terms of policy implications, we think if interruptions are inevitable, then perhaps plan this into the operations, particularly the ability to inform water users ahead of time so that water cuts are not unexpected, but people could moderate their behaviors. They can build it into their daily schedule, so now they're not just having to run to the river to do their laundry. And finally, consider predictability in post-SDG monitoring and metrics. So what does predictability mean overall in terms of systems functioning? And what does intermittency mean very broadly? And so these are some of the concepts that folks working in this world are thinking through. And so here are all of the study authors. So thanks to them. And that's it. So thank you so much.
Now we'll move to Q&A for Cassandra. 3 minutes. Please, come to the line, that way everybody moves here. Thank you for this presentation. Very exciting. I saw in your one of your slides at the beginning a photo of a water here.
Yes. Yeah.
I wondering if you studied that specific technology against your study measures, and if you have any insights to share about it.
That's an excellent question. So one, No, we didn't. And also I'd have to click back to see whose picture that was because I asked all my co-authors to send the pictures to populate the slides. So we didn't actually study any technologies in this particular study, none of the ways that users can mitigate the effects. And so at least in the social sciences literature, coping with household water insecurity, I think is really the next push in terms of research. So I think that something like that is going to be really, really critical. Yeah.
Wondering if you found any results or data about how the cause of the interruption to water impacts the emotional stress or stressful behavior outcomes.
I don't like Josh because we talked about this. Josh is part of the parent study. So in terms of this particular study, no, but yes, in some of our sub work, looking at perceptions of that and people's frustration. And I think that, well, I'm going to speak a little of some of my own personal work, is that I think people's frustration and anger particularly comes with what they perceive to be the cause, particularly in systems where they're frustrated that it's not functioning as it should. Like that there's definitely the assumption that you know, the powers that be know the problem and they're not doing anything to mitigate it. And so that's within some of the sites that I've worked on. But in terms of this overall study, we did not analyze those variables. We have them. But what we have found, though, is looking across so many sites, trying to then look for patterns across, 20 something sites in terms of what do you see as the ultimate cause has actually proven very analytically challenging.
So we have to apologize. We'll take one last questions because we want to be fair across the board. But at the end, if we have additional time, please feel free to come back. Thank you.
I wondered if the HWA's initial field work provided any way to see whether these families are already using secondary sources, whether there's already some water stacking occurring.
Yeah.
Because you would imagine these service interruptions are just the primary source. I wonder if
Yeah.
there's any way to look at when people are perhaps not storing water, but may have a secondary source that they're resorting to, without having to feel that that's necessarily unclean or unsafe.
Yeah, and I'll answer that very briefly, but yes and no. So yes, we did ask questions about what is your primary drinking source and what are other sources, but we didn't do like a cascade of it. So not like if this one doesn't work, then what? So I think that's important future data, but to some degree we do have some information, but thank you because that might be something we could look at in a future analysis, looking at that kind of secondary source. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. Awesome. Our third speaker will discuss water portfolio. Diversification has a strategy to catalyze urban water security in cities. And we welcome Doreen with the Stockholm Environment Institute. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm not the person in your brochure. Annette couldn't make it today, so I'm Doreen Brown-Salazar. This is a part of a project with USAID led by Tetra Tech, the Urban Wash Initiative. The objective of this study was to understand the suite of water protection and diversification solutions, the resilience that can enhance resilience of cities, and the constraints. And to look at challenges, enablers of planning, risk assessment, stakeholder involvement, and financing. So pretty broad, but primarily focused outside the city, understanding that there are issues also within the cities that influence these. What we did was a literature review of over 170 references, some of which were references of other studies. So we covered quite a broad range of literature with 42 countries and 100 municipal areas, focusing on lower and middle income countries. And we did some deep dive case studies in 7 cities, Cape Town in South Africa, Amman in Jordan, Manila in the Philippines, Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, Lusaka in Zambia, Quito, Ecuador, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. And for the case studies, we did a targeted literature review, and we also had key informant interviews. So I just wanted to start by defining what we meant by portfolio diversification. We're not just looking at what options are outside of the city, but we're looking at unconventional water sources as well as demand side options such as addressing water loss and demand management. We also included source water protection, recognizing that enhances the ability to diversify. And that would include nature-based solutions, regulation, and other measures. Prior to talking about the case studies, I just wanted to give an overview of the diversity of the cities that we looked at in terms of their challenges as well as the environment in which they're located. So you can see Addis Ababa and Lusaka both have very high levels of informal settlements. We have a diversity of income ranges, a diversity of urban growth rates in terms of precipitation, water scarcity. Amman is one of the most stressed of this set. And also the last two columns are not setting, they're more looking at the responses. When we looked at the data for the entire region and we looked at non-revenue water in our particular towns, we saw that most of these cities that we highlighted as success examples, they had done a pretty good job of addressing non-revenue water. And they had pretty good levels of water service coverage compared to other cities. So now let's look at the case studies in detail. In terms of Lusaka, they have rapid population growth over abstraction. And like I had mentioned on the previous slide, a very high level of informal settlements. But the issue that brought the water and sanitation up to the forefront was a cholera epidemic. And so the responses to that you see here, they're largely focused on water quality. They rely heavily on groundwater. And so we're looking at contamination of groundwater and how you can stop that. And what they were able to do was pull together a multi-stakeholder platform. So we're talking about solutions that are not just technical, but how do you bring people together? How do you bring all the voices in? And they were able to improve water quality by borehole licensing, well field protection, improved wastewater collection, and water quality monitoring by community-based organizations. They also developed strategies to prepare for droughts and climate change. And the results of these efforts have been improved service and a more resilient water supply system. In Sao Paulo, it was also a crisis that helped to mobilize both short-term and long-term improvements to their water supply. In particular, there was a severe drought in 2014. And as a response to that severe drought, they were able to creatively implement some solutions to, for example, pull water out of the dead zone of a reservoir and use that. But they also implemented longer term solutions and structures to bring multi-stakeholders together. So they were able to implement regional decision-making structures. They have also been able to regularize and extend service to informal sediments. They've addressed water losses. They've implemented source water protection. So basically a diversity of different solutions that have helped make their system more resilient. And they faced in 2018, 4 years later, a drought that was similar in severity to the 2014 drought, and found that they were not as impacted in terms of their service level provision. So they could actually measure the impact of the various improvements that they had implemented. The last case study here that we're highlighting is Amman in Jordan. In this case, it's just an ongoing situation. It's exacerbated by migration of immigrants from refugees. And they just have very little water. There are multi-country agreements that both bringing water in and distributing water to other countries. So it's very complex. In this case, Again, looking at non-revenue water and campaigns to raise awareness in terms of water scarcity. They've been extremely successful in this context, as Jordan is known as one of the lowest urban and residential water demands in the world. So those campaigns to raise awareness about water have been very successful. And Amman, and you don't think about this in these low resource settings, but they use desalinated water and a very strong reuse of wastewater. 90% of their wastewater is reused for agriculture. One of the questions we asked is, okay, you've got all these lovely ideas of solutions, how do you pay for them? And what we found is the cities that successfully were able to find ways to finance these various solutions, they didn't use just one financing source. They were able to leverage various sources. The other thing we found is that those that, and you see the second line here, those that were able to charge tariffs that at least cover operation and maintenance costs, they're able to access more resources. They're able to access loans. They're able to use those tariffs to put into a fund that protects the watershed. So being able to get to that place where your tariffs cover your operation and maintenance costs is very helpful. And it's hard to summarize findings regarding strategies, tools, enabling factors in just 4 little bullets, but we've done our best here. But the first one I wanted to start with is something that calls back to the opening session yesterday, and that is that crises can serve as a catalyst to mobilize political support, financial support, both for short-term solutions, but you can also use that to get people together to start looking at long-term planning. So looking at that nexus between our emergency response to this crisis or this perceived crisis and our long-term plans that where we can improve our resilience over time. I think sometimes even just being able to frame the crisis or to frame the issue in a way that people can understand that it's urgent is important. And so when you think about the 0-day crisis in South Africa, getting people talking the same language about that is helpful as well. And we saw that, well, in several of our cities. So now we have the political support. We have maybe some financial resources. The next finding that we have here is to utilize risk-based planning, consider risks as you are implementing your plans. So think about what is our backup plans, what is our redundancy, what kinds of different risks do we in this context face, and how can we prepare for them? I think preparing as Lebanon for multiplying your population by 2 is not an easy one to prepare for, but there are many risks on the shorter scale that you can be prepared for. And including stakeholder input, because sometimes if we're on this level, we don't understand and we're planning for solutions that are not acceptable to the populations, are not going to be those that will work. Yeah, as I had mentioned, the diversification of water supplies, you can think about both things that can be implemented immediately after the crisis, but also later. And so we have some cities that for example, are using groundwater, stored groundwater to mitigate water supplies during shortages. So think of groundwater as a short-term solution, or purchasing water from agricultural users. But also looking at long-term plans. And last on this slide, I just wanted to recognize the fact that addressing system inefficiencies, addressing water loss, addressing being able to maintain your system needs to be a priority. Dysfunctional equipment and water losses decrease the ability to provide service. They decrease resilience. And then lastly, something that's not on this slide, but what we did find is that once cities included risk planning into their systems and considered resilience, that it was easy to continue doing that. That just became part of their standard operation, the way they do business. So that's it. Go ahead. Think.
And one of the things that I find really interesting is first to address, to be prepared for crisis and I was thinking about this. To be prepared for risk, putting your eggs in different baskets, but oftentimes who owns the basket, who manages the basket within government agencies, and you talked about sometimes the nature-based solution is probably forestry agencies about water supply, how it works, and sometimes within the system, these bureaucrats are working, the institutional design in some way cannot make them work together really well because of specific institutions have specific mandates. And maybe during crisis, it's easier to gather more political will for collaboration, but within the institutional barriers, what's your idea for ensuring future collaboration to ensure different strategies can work together well and you to address future crises?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of the political leadership really is the political leadership sometimes to bring a new institution or to strengthen an existing institution that protects the watershed on a watershed level. So when you talk about watersheds, you really are reaching beyond the municipality. You're reaching into a broader level, and they need to be coordinating with all the actors that are involved. So definitely building structures, strengthening structures, making sure they last and they're not just there in case of an emergency is important.
All right. Well, thank you again, Doreen. I guess we'll have more time for Q&A at the end. Last but not least, we have Jigisha, thank you, who will discuss urban water security and climate resilience into arid cities of India. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. I am Jigisha Jaiswal. I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues, as unfortunately they could not be present here today. I'll start with the big numbers. What we've seen that if we do not take impactful measures, so by 2050, there will be double population who will be under water stress. And coming to the case of India, where we see that currently there are almost 12% of its population is living in on the verge of day zero scenario. 4.3 billion population in the Asia Pacific region alone are water insecure. So looking into this, we've seen that in the international agendas as well as the national agendas in India, we've seen that importance of water security has increased. Government of India has also taken a strong emphasis on water security and introduced various national programs such as Amrut, which focuses on the urban areas, and the Jal Jeevan Mission, which focuses on the water security of the rural areas. Today, I'll present the case of two cities which reside in arid regions in the western part of India, Gujarat, and they have a population around 25,000 and 85,000. And these cities have been facing drought at a frequency of every 2.5 years. And their annual rainfall is around 430 mm, which in comparison to the national average of 1,200 to 1,500 mm is quite less. And also these cities are located on the coastal region. So historically seen, the cities have faced water crisis chronically, and the major source of their water supply has been the distant water source called the Narmada River, which is around 1,000 kilometers away from the city. And the other source is the groundwater. drought prone region, they face the urban flooding challenges as well during the monsoon season. So to overcome these challenges, the city has taken various initiatives to move towards water security, where I'll be taking you through all these initiatives which the city has taken while doing a water security framework assessment, using of innovative tools to understand their groundwater levels, doing in detail geohydrological study, doing pilot demonstrations, and then working ahead on scaling them up, and also scaling up initiatives from the city level to the state level. Starting with the services side of the water, the city conducted, a framework was formed which focuses on the services as well as the resources which the city uses. So based on this framework, the framework was also developed because currently we see there are so many various frameworks which are available globally, but this framework was developed to make it more localized so that the city will be able to use it and to identify whatever challenges or the gaps the city faces. So based on the assessment, it was seen that the city is dependent on the highly distant source of water, as I mentioned earlier, and intermittent supply of alternate days, or in one of the city, which is Gandhidham, it gets the water supply in once in 3 or 4 days. So I think, as Cassandra also mentioned, this intermittent supply causes behavioral impacts. And in addition to that, we also saw that the city is now dependent a lot on the private water supplier. So the private market has come up, and on top of it, the vulnerable population, they have to spend additional on providing the water to get the water. This we did at a city level. We are also focusing to understand how the slum and the vulnerable pockets are performing. The study is not yet completed, it is ongoing. So we're focusing on understanding the availability, the reliability at the slum levels. Now moving toward the resources, we started to first understand what is the groundwater level in the city. And to monitor this, we used an application which is empaneled by the Government of India as well, which is quite a simple app where you just need to, on the borewell, if you just hit an instrument and keep the mobile phone near to it, it will give you the recording and give you the depth of the groundwater level. We also verified it by actually doing the conventional method. So the results which we got were quite nearby, and so we can say that the app is also quite efficient to understand and monitor the groundwater levels. So we initiated with our study with this, and then further we deep dived into conducting a geohydrological study of the area to understand the aquifer and the watershed of the city. Based on this study, we identified the pilot locations where we wanted to do rainwater harvesting. So based on this, we identified the municipal schools, the institutional buildings, the urban flooding areas, and basically the stormwater drains, with the major stormwater drains of the city, where we can conduct the pilot projects. With these pilot projects, they are recently completed, and with the first monsoon, we've seen around 88,000 liters of rainwater collected collected in the municipal schools. So in the rainwater harvesting, as you can see, is implemented in the school, where along with the rainwater structure, we've also implemented a bioswale structure. So when the rainwater does not percolate further in the recharge structure, it gets to the bioswale, and bioswale is a structure which increases the retaining capacity of the whole area of the soil. So in that way, we've tried to amalgamate these two structures of rainwater harvesting. Further, to maintain this rainwater and groundwater structures, we formed a committee which is a part of the school itself. So the students and the teachers, they have formed the committee themselves, with like around 12 students and 3 faculty members leading this committee. And the students were taught the importance and further were trained on how to maintain the structures. And of course, the maintenance of these structures is not so difficult. The students and the faculty members can take care of it. Based on this, since it was this year, this was the feedback which we received from the school, that in the areas where they received, where they saw water logging, this year they did not see water logging. And so they did not have to call the council office to ask for somebody to pump out the water, and they did not get the students did not get a holiday in the school. And apart from that, the school was also happy because they will be now getting an incentive fund which the government has launched to to build the rainwater harvesting structure. So they were happy to get some additional fund from the government, and of course they were safe from the waterborne diseases which would be there if there is a urban flooding situation. Apart from the school side, we also implemented urban groundwater recharge structures in the urban areas of the city, and there also the locations were decided in such a way that it mitigates the urban flooding issue. So lastly, this is done currently at a pilot scale, but we aim to scale these practices up at the city level, and then further at the state level, where various cities can also implement these practices. So first is like engaging, like have to implement, where to implement. So based on the geohydrological study which we've done, we initially identified only the pilots, but now we'll be also identifying other areas, as well as trying to inbuild in the bylaws, which is I think already inbuilt in the bylaws, to have rainwater harvesting structures, but maybe identify mechanisms on how the households will also adopt to it. The second is trying to identify the funding and preparing the strategy to make it implement. And lastly, in which technologies and who will build, we are also working on identifying these implementers. So the outcomes of the project which we've received till now is the source sustainability. So as I mentioned, with the rainwater harvesting structures, we've observed that now for the lean period, there is availability of water at least the municipality schools. Climate resilience in a way that urban flooding is mitigated in the areas where it was urban flooded. Community participation, we tried and involved the teachers and the students in this activity, so that further later, as we all know, the children carry it home and the message is being spread. So in that way, we've tried to involve the community participation as well. And policy level and scaling up initiatives, we are further working on it. So based on this, we have prepared an urban water security planning toolkit, which is made in such a way that it can be localized. And further, the modules are also developed in such a way that if a stakeholder wants to use only one particular module, it is developed in such a way that only that particular module can be used, and the solutions or the analysis can be done accordingly. So I'd like to end this with this thought that water is a primary vehicle through which we feel the impacts of climate change. And so I think all of us are here for this. Thank you.
Awesome. Now we will start questions for Jigisha, who is from the Center for Water and Sanitation, CEPT University. The floor is open.
Thanks very much for this presentation on urban water security. I'm curious as to what a fraction of water needs in this country and you think can be fulfilled through rainwater harvesting. Is it as much a drainage benefit as it is a water supply benefit? And additionally, how much do you think that these cities are going to depend upon the Narmada supply, when in the longer term, the port development
considering on how much fraction of water, I completely understand that it is a very arid region and the rainfall is scarce. So that is not much, but I think we try to evaluate around 10 to 15% of the demand of the water demand can be resolved using the rainwater harvesting structures in those cities. And apart from that, we've also seen I'm diving into another section, but we have another project working on which we are working, where this city are also doing wastewater reuse, where they are selling selling the sewage to a private industry, which is reusing their water, treating their water and reusing their water itself. So the industries have also taken up the initiatives because they are the people who used to live in those regions. So in that way, they are trying to reduce the usage of fresh water and try to use treated wastewater. But and apart from that, the city will be dependent on the Narmada basin, because apart from that, there is no other water source which is available around the city. And not only the Kutch region, the whole Gujarat state is quite dependent on the Narmada basin river water. But the approach here was that it is not necessary for the city to just depend on the distant water sources. It should also start looking at other alternative water sources, which in whatever extent or whatever quantity of water it can accumulate. Thank you.
Awesome.
I have a question, but I find it very hard to.
Please shout it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I'll try to speak loud, hopefully it can be heard. I have two questions, because I think it's a very nice story. It makes me wonder what is the cost investment per city and whether it's scalable, you think? And my other question is, how do you look at this over time? We've now done a sort of quality input into the water resource management of the city. Do you think they need to repeat this every 5 years, or what would they need to do over time to keep adapting?
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. And we have been brainstorming over this question a lot, the latter which you asked. On the first part, on investing side, what we understood was there are a lot of national programs right now, which the government of India is pushing. Like in Amrut, the government of India is asking cities to revive their water bodies. And also there's another Bhujal program which is going on in India, which also focuses on improving and recharging of the groundwater. So there are funds available, but through various streams at national level, at state level, which the cities can utilize to implement these structures. And on the other maintenance side, we understood that the maintenance of the structures, we identified the structures in such a way that the maintenance is not it does not require a very high maintenance or does not require a lot of skill to maintain the structures. So the recharge tanks which are selected are called mineralized tanks, which generally which are very easy to clean before the monsoon season start. So I think and the life of this tanks are also around 20 to 25 years. So maybe later, after 25 years, we'll have to replace them. So this and I agree, we have not yet thought on how later we'll keep on implementing it, and we are still working on have to scale this up at the city level, because in the city there is already a bylaw which says, in the building bylaw, which says that all the residential buildings must have the rainwater harvesting structures, though we do not see that being observed in the city. So yeah, we are trying to identify which modes or means we can use to have this. So giving an example from the energy side, in India earlier, few years back, the solar energy panel, solar panels was a similar drive was introduced to have solar panels at every rooftop. But the households could not adopt it because of cost constraints and the financial implications. But now the government has subsidized it so much that now I think a lot of households have taken up that initiative to have solar panels on their houses. So maybe a similar approach, if we can identify something in water, that will be helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Warms of applause. Thank you. And since we have actually 9 minutes left in this session, I would like to welcome all 4 speakers to the front and open the floor to any questions. Warm of applause. Thank you. Now, Sarah, Cassandra, Jigisha, and Doreen, please. Feel free to take a seat. Thank you.
So I got to experience the Cape Town Day Zero experience firsthand. Got to live through that in 2018, and there was part of many people involved in the active recovery from that and building the resilience there. So adding that, I both experienced and saw peers and others in the community experience many of the stressors that Cassandra speaks to, I guess all of them. And it was interesting that not only, there you're not looking at a service interruption, but almost the potential of a service interruption triggered all of those stress responses. So I'd be curious to know how the research feeds into that, or can that be expanded out? And then also, I'm wondering if they've looked at lessons learned from the power sector. South Africa has also been experiencing intermittent power supply for the past decade, but more it's intensified in recent times. And they do scheduled and communicated outages. And I'm wondering if there's lessons to be learned from that in speaking to your question about longitudinal studies, if there would be similarities between the sectors. And then a question as well, talking about the various adaptations. I'm curious if, like Cape Town, where they were very intentional about diversifying their water supplies to build resilience, were the other communities that you studied, were they also very equally as intentional in that diversification, or is it more of a matter of we need more water, let's find it wherever we can get it?
Would you like someone in particular to answer those questions?
Sorry, I guess the question was kind of
Okay.
And just, thinking about like anticipatory anxiety, I think is addressed at least in some part of climate concerns, but I think that would be like, that's really, really interesting to think about that, especially as water insecurity only is exacerbated by climate. But to your second point, no, we hadn't considered looking at the energy sector, and that is really interesting. At least, well, my site was actually kicked out of the analyses, but in Morogoro, where I was doing my work, the water cuts are scheduled, and it's still really frustrating for people. So I think, as mentioned over time, like you can announce it, but if it happens over a couple of years, people are still.
Yeah, they're simply exhausted around
Exactly.
in South Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms, I think we really broadened the word diversification when the city that I know best, which is Quito, surface water is their water source. But what they've done is prepared for risks by interconnecting systems. They've reduced their losses. They've got some emergency structures because in their case, the risk that they're more concerned about is lava flow that's going to wipe out their pipelines. So they've got some emergency structures for when the water line wipes it out, then they can put that in. So yeah, so it's just thinking broadly about risks and how we're gonna be, what are the risks that are most likely to occur with which frequency, and how are we going to respond in the short term to provide service and in the longer term.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. And we have someone at the mic.
My question is, Cassandra, I guess as we have been researching, I guess it's a comment and a question as well, because I think in a lot of circumstances, you find that amongst local households, they do have coping mechanisms that they have developed. They set up their own water supply system, if you like, they put in wells, I would actually sell in water service. And then it's like this toxic mix of people actually exiting the whole formal water supply system. And I'm just curious as to whether you had any plans or you're really interacting with some of the service providers, the formal service providers in those contexts to understand what their take is on this matter. Because I think one of the problematic situations that arises is that houses are still getting bills for their water supply, or they're still getting their electricity bills. But in reality, they're not getting the service. And so, yeah, just curious as to whether this is something that you are researching and what's the sentiment that you're getting from those officials.
You're fine. I think they're out of battery. Sorry. But feel free to come up.
Okay.
If you want to. Yeah. Thank you.
Trying to be accessible. So, wow, really good questions. And your comment about people who have cisterns, well, if you lose your electricity long enough, then it doesn't matter and you still have to pump the system. So I guess tying to energy, that's a really big concern. Oh, but opting out is such a key question. And that's happening in the US and where communities do prefer the smaller systems because they want nothing to do with the municipalities. I haven't done work, but those are really key, I think, future areas for research. And so thank you.
All right. I think it's 4:42. Oh, please, please. Go ahead.
A couple of questions there. One is to what extent does the index help you assess baseline stress? So that this, are people highly stressed to begin with and this amplifies it, or do you know what the baseline is? That would be the first question. And related to that, part of the argument is that with repeated experience, there's coping, and there's also expectations that can attenuate insecurity. Yeah. Alternatively, you can have these stresses producing anxiety disorders. And I wonder if you've looked at that anxiety disorder as a further extension of the stress assessments.
To your first question, so the HY scale is now 12 questions. It's been, they actually have 4, but the one that I most commonly use is 12 questions. And so one, it's not diagnostic, it's frequency based. So it's within the last 30 days. And the one that's 4 questions, I believe, is a year in terms of like the duration. So it is capable of capturing change over time as long as you enumerate it over time in terms of baseline, but in like, at least for us, some of us in our work use screeners. So in previous work, there has been associations between water insecurity and Hopkins scores, so depression and anxiety, right? And so these are not just, have you worried about your water? These are actual like screeners for mental health illness. And so yes, there are associations between water insecurity and those kinds of outcomes. Yeah.
Thank you. 4:44. We're right on time. Thank you. And help me thank again our speakers. You're welcome to. And that concludes our session. And we hope that you are inspired to use wisely water. Enjoy Chapel Hill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know they there's a lot of, like getting. But if
How it is.
Before it was validated.
I am, but please, free. Lurking on.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's really just like in that space and
See where there is. I'd like to know the.
you know, and, I think that is. Yeah. So, how do you? Okay.
It's very far. That's where something like the was. Or after community gains access going from surface water, right, together water out of the river to full on central.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That is what
I think I might have an opportunity on that.
Yeah, and like, you know, we were lucky to be in this region and like. We got lucky in that, like, that and the water engineer, but he's already learned that. And so was able to do that research on his own to be like, okay, well, what do I need to know? What can I do? But like, you know, like we lost water because our well pump, like, we got it broke, and great, we had to like rewire it, like, just like stuff like that. And like, And no one ever been to see like, oh, that's. Like I remember distinctly, there were so many times my dad saw and so it's like, I'm on the phone with my dad, we're under a tree trying to figure out why the well is not working. Because there's nobody to call and be like, why are you? Problem, is something broken? What do we do? And like, I recognize that people privileged enough to have the like, at the bare minimum knowledge capacity, but like that is very much not even consistent in our region.
Yeah.
What is South Central Pennsylvania?
Okay, yeah, sorry, you're in Stockholm, yeah. I just want to say.
I'm also doing research in the intermittent context, but not. Yeah. And it's like around the factors. Yeah, like what were some of the things I guess that like disqualified some of those wages?
It had to do with, I think, like how the questions were asked.
Who's all here?
That's the map.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No problem. Taking a very conservative approach about how missing this. And so they like, really, if there was any degree of missing this, they were just moving pieces. And so if you drop below a certain number. And so, but I actually have, like, more qualitative work coming out about TMC. So I know some of the site, individual sites are working on papers about their. That like should have to dominate a better.
Yeah.
You're making your way along.
And then
That's fun.
you said that you guys haven't looked at like stress with respect to power. No, it's like we're in the process of seeing if we like funding stuff, et cetera.
Yeah.
But if we do, I'm probably gonna be a part of this project where it's a small company that does for in like voltage sensors. But they want to be able to use them for predictive maintenance. So in areas that have these either unreliable or like low quality power sources, they want to see if they can tell when outages are coming, as well as like when you might be using a pump, for example, because they're like dying very quickly. So you're ending up with like month outages that are unplanned. Of water, even though like your power, they wouldn't have like sent out notifications and stuff like that. And so this is obviously very infrastructure based, but I'd be very interested to see as well if they're able to track in some way the relation to the emotional stress aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you just mentioned. Yeah. Yeah, I think like in terms of future, that's so important. And yeah, I wish I don't have any answers for that, but yeah, do that.
Can I get your comment?
Nice meeting you. Hi.
Great work.
Oh, thank you.
Very impressive.
Yes,
Search
hi.
Kentucky Tech.
Oh, hi.
So I've got an interest in non-revenue water, and especially in most of the places where we work our intermittent systems.
Yeah.
It's, and, you know, there's such a behavior change function around that. I'm wondering, you know, it'd be interesting to see, you know, I've like highlighted in my notes to say, you know, is it something that we could integrate into non-revenue water management programs as like it's such a big community aspect of NRW management. In fact, we've just been awarded, we've got a 4-year program in West Bank. To work in the Southern West Bank on non-revenue water management. It's an intermittent supply system. If there's any place where I'd like to reduce somebody's stress levels, like that might be a good place to implement that.
And it's like, it is the question, because we talk about that a lot in our workshop, is like, is intermittency the norm or the future? Or could it be, should it be, you know, like, how are we going to work with systems are by default going to have to be, you know, so how do we work around that?
24/7 is the gold standard. On so many levels.
I know.
If we can get there, even if it's, you know, I've got a friend that works in the NRW space, like quite high, that's what he does. And, you know, his argument is the best thing you can do is